Hey Team Bio, welcome to your screencast on organic compounds part 3. This one is about proteins. Okay, proteins. I'm sure you've heard of them before. You might have some information about them, and you also might have some misinformation about them. What are they made of? Primarily carbon, but also hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. We talked about the nitrogen cycle early on in the year. There's tons of nitrogen in the atmosphere. I think 78% of the atmosphere is N2 gas, but that's not a form that is usable by producers, so it has to be converted to a form they can use by bacteria that live in the soil or in their root systems. And this needs to happen because nitrogen is an essential atom or element for building proteins. So that's one way in which proteins are a little bit different than our fats and lipids and our carbohydrates, is the presence of nitrogen. Nitrogen is also going to be found in our nucleic acids, so DNA and RNA. We'll see that later on in the year. Okay, functions of protein. The main functions of protein, well, there are a couple of functions that are important. Protein can be structural. There are many examples of structural protein. I'm going to talk to you about one of them, keratin. Keratin is a protein that's found in your hair as well as your nails. It is what gives the structure to both of those features of your body. These cells are no longer alive, but they are chock-a-block full of keratin, giving them the structure that they have. Okay, another function of protein is hormonal. So we talked about sex hormones in the last screencast, testosterone and estrogen. Those were based off of cholesterol, or cholesterol is their building block. So those were hormones that were lipid-derived, but there are many protein hormones. Some examples of protein hormones are insulin, or HGH, also called human growth hormone. So insulin is a protein that is necessary to basically take glucose from your bloodstream and move it into your cells. Human growth hormone is partially what determines the height you achieve over the course of your life. Okay, so proteins can also be hormones. Another super important function of proteins is enzymatic. So proteins also form enzymes. There are so many different types of enzymes, and we're going to be talking about tons of different enzymes over the course of this year. The one example that I'm going to give to you today is salivary amylase. Okay, an enzyme is essentially like a little biological catalyst. It speeds up a reaction without being consumed in that reaction. They make life possible, enzymes do, because they take reactions that are going to happen really slowly and they speed them up to such a rate that life can proceed. Salivary amylase is an example of one enzyme. The function that it plays is it's secreted in your saliva and it breaks down starch into glucose monomers. I don't know if you've ever noticed, but if you put a cracker, which is not super sweet, on the tip of your tongue, and you just let it sit there for a while and let it dissolve in your saliva, there are two things happening in your mouth. One is mechanical breakdown of your food, which is primarily your teeth are doing that mechanical breakdown, but also chemical digestion of your food also starts in your mouth. Your mouth contains an enzyme called salivary amylase that takes starch and it breaks it down starts to break it down into glucose monomers. So if you let a cracker sit on your tongue for long enough, it will get all mushy-gushy, and it will also start to taste sweeter because you perceive glucose to be sweeter than you perceive starch. And salivary amylase is doing that job of breaking down those starch polymers into glucose monomers. Okay, a major misconception about proteins is that they are an excellent energy source, and this is not true. Protein is the energy of last resort of your body. If you are taking protein and you're burning it for energy, this means that you are starving. And that's not a great situation to be in. Often foods that are high in protein, oh, I forgot the G in here. ENERGY. Okay, often foods that are high in protein are also high in fat. The reason why these foods fill us up and satiate us is the fat, not so much the protein. If you eat a lot of extra protein, that protein is going to be deaminated and peed out. And it's going to be converted to a compound that enters the citric acid cycle. I'm giving you too much information here. Yeah, delete that. Know that protein is the energy of last, or it's not an energy form that your body really wants to use for energy. If you're burning the protein in your body, it essentially means that you're starving. If you could overconsume protein, it's going to be deaminated and converted to a different form. You're going to pee out the excess, and it's either going to enter the citric acid cycle or be converted to fat. So don't be swindled by protein powders. Just eat a complete diet and you're going to get plenty of protein. Okay, so you might notice that we've got some interesting images here. We've got some raw wool. We've got some yarn in unknitted in a skein, and then we have a sweater. And I swear it's going to link up to talking about proteins in a second. Okay, this raw wool is my stand-in or my metaphor for my monomer of protein. A monomer of protein is called an amino acid. All amino acids have the same basic structure. They have a central carbon, which is bonded on one side to a group which is called an amino group. It's this right here. And on the other side, it's bonded to a carboxyl group, which looks like this. You will become better acquainted with these structures in the next week or so. Okay, so this is called a carboxyl, and this is called an amino group. And then the central carbon is also bonded to a hydrogen on this side. So all amino acids have the same basic backbone. They have the amino group, they have the carboxyl group bound to the central carbon, but then also bound to the central carbon is what's called an R group. This group is variable. I'm just going to do it in purple here. So this is a variable group. So this R group could be a ring. An example of a ring would be phenylalanine. No, that's not a ring, actually. What is an example? Tyrosine would be an example of a ring structure. It could be a long branch chain. It could be just a tiny little carbon dangler. This group is highly variable, and you're going to see their structures in the coming days. Okay, How many different types of amino acids are there? Well, there are 20 unique UNIQ amino acids. And what makes them unique is this variable group that is hanging off the end of this chain. Okay, in some different types of bacteria, there are actually 22, but in animals and plants and fungi, there are 20 different amino acids. In people, 12 of these different types of amino acids can be produced in our bodies. But 8 of them must be consumed. We call these 8 that must be consumed the 8 essential amino acids. Anytime you eat another heterotroph, you're going to get all of these 8 that you must consume. Like, for example, if you ate a hamburger, the cow would be full of amino acids and it would have all 20. So you'd get those 12 that you can produce yourself, and you'd also get the 8 that you need to consume in order to stay alive. If you eat rice and beans, that's what's called a complete protein because it contains all 8 of the essential amino acids that you need in order to stay alive. Okay, so if you take 2 amino acids and you string them together, so if you had 1 amino acid and then you added to another amino acid, you would get what's called a dipeptide. The bond that is represented by this plus sign here is called a peptide bond, which is why 2 amino acids together is called a dipeptide. So this would be our example of our dimer. Would be a dipeptide. But we're actually not going to spend a lot of time in this class talking about dipeptides. We're actually going to spend a lot more time talking about polymers of amino acids or proteins. Okay, so let me tell you why I've chosen these images of raw wool and yarn and then my sweater. Raw wool is woven into yarn. And yarn in this form, if you just took it out and kind of laid it all over your body, it wouldn't do a fantastic job of keeping you warm. It needs to be folded in this very specific way where the arms are just in the right spot for human arms to fit, and there's a hole in the neck for the head and the space for your torso here. So the shape of a sweater is actually a very specific shape to fit your body and to perform the function of keeping you warm or maybe looking stylish or both. This would be an example of a polymer. So if we take a bunch of amino acids and we form a long chain, we would get what's called a polypeptide. But this polypeptide, actually is not super functional in this shape. When it's a long straight chain, or when the yarn is a long straight chain like this, it doesn't really do a great job of keeping us warm, like the sweater. So in order to take a polypeptide and turn it into a functional protein, it has to be folded. So when a polypeptide is folded into a specific shape, then it becomes a functional protein. But this folding is really important. If you just folded this ball of yarn into a random shape, it's not going to be a sweater, and it's not going to perform the function that a sweater performs as well as a sweater does. So that's a super important takeaway here, that a polypeptide has to be, which is a long chain of amino acids, has to be folded into a very specific shape in order to become a functional protein. And we're going to spend like a week talking about this process, how we go from a single amino acid to a polypeptide and then actually to a functional protein. So what happens at every stage? How do we get there? And then what happens when it falls apart? And yes, so much more to come on this. So I guess this is also a polymer. But yeah, the big takeaway, proteins, in order to be functional, have to be folded into a specific shape. That is all. I'll see you in class after break.